Imagine taking a really complex 90-day corporate process, a process that currently costs your company over $250,000.
Right.
And you shrink it down to 3 days.
Yeah.
And then you push the operational cost down to a mere $15,000.
Wow.
Yeah. And the most critical part here for anyone paying attention to the news, doing all of this with absolutely zero regulatory violations. I mean, does that sound like science fiction to you?
Oh, I mean, it sounds like the kind of pitch that gets a vendor literally laughed out of a CTO's office. Let's be real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that specific transformation, that's a documented reality happening right now in production environments.
Yeah, and that is exactly why we're here today.
Right. We are doing a deep dive into exactly how that's being achieved today. So for everyone listening, whether you're a lead developer building out your architecture, maybe a CTO managing API costs, or just a European business leader navigating this, the enforcement phase of the new regulations.
Which is a huge headache right now.
Oh, massive headache. But this deep dive is tailored specifically for you. We are examining a highly timely strategy blueprint that was just published by AetherLink.
Right, the Dutch AI consulting firm.
Yes, AetherLink. They're known for their core enterprise product line, so that's Aetherbot for AI agents, Aethermind for AI strategy, and AetherDV for AI development.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to really break down their framework for building enterprise-grade autonomous systems. Systems that are highly efficient, fully compliant with all these impending laws, and optimized to actually keep your compute budgets under control.
Which is the holy grail, right? But I think we have to establish the stakes here first, because the landscape has fundamentally shifted in just the last 12 months.
Oh, absolutely.
We are no longer operating in the era of reactive, single-turn chatbots. We are firmly in the era of agentic AI.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at IBM's 2025 State of AI and Enterprise report, they noted that 67% of Fortune 500 companies are already piloting multi-agent workflows.
67%. That's huge.
It is. But for European businesses specifically, the EU AI Act 2026 enforcement phase, well, it elevates this from a standard technological upgrade to a really existential high-stakes evolution.
Right, because designing an architecture that fails a compliance audit now, that carries systemic financial penalties.
Yeah.
It's not just a slap on the wrist anymore.
Exactly. It can bankrupt a project overnight.
So, okay, let's unpack the core architectural shift driving this. Because to understand how a company achieves that kind of extreme ROI we mentioned at the start, we need to look at why a monolithic AI model working all by itself is just no longer the standard.
It's just not viable anymore.
Right. For the developers listening, that trying to force one giant large language model to maintain state, retrieve data, and execute subroutines across a multi-step process.
It just creates a massive bottleneck.
Exactly. It's a huge bottleneck. So multi-agent orchestration completely changes that paradigm.
It really does. Instead of one generalized model attempting to act as this, universal solver for everything, multi-agent orchestration deploys specialized autonomous workers.
Right.
The AetherLink blueprint actually uses a great enterprise analogy here regarding invoice processing.
And the invoice one, yeah. Walk us through that.
So in a modernized setup, you don't just have one AI, you deploy a dedicated procurement agent, and then a totally separate compliance checker agent and a distinct data validator agent, and they collaborate.
Which makes so much more sense.
Yeah, and the Gartner 2025 report actually found that 56% of AI native enterprises have already migrated to this specific architecture, and they're reducing task completion times by 43%.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But the vulnerability there has to be orchestration, right?
Oh, definitely.
Because if you have, say, 5 or 10 autonomous agents initiating subroutines and generating data, they can't just operate in a vacuum.
No, it would be chaos.
Right. MIT's 2025 Autonomous Systems Roadmap highlights this. They say that without centralized governance, these decentralized systems just collapse at scale. They end up overriding each other or, creating infinite loops.
Yeah, and that brings us to the control plane.
Right, the control plane.
The control plane essentially acts as the central nervous system for the whole multi-agent network. It dynamically routes tasks to the appropriate agent based on, availability and capability.
So it's like a traffic cop.
Exactly like a traffic cop. It
Yeah.
queues decisions to ensure you aren't hitting API rate limits, and it actively prevents redundant computations so you aren't paying for the same work twice.
Which is where the cost savings come in.
Exactly. The efficiency gains are just stark. McKinsey's data indicates that multi-agent systems utilizing a rigorous control plane achieve 62% faster process cycles
Wow.
and a 38% cost reduction compared to single-agent approaches attempting the exact same workflows.
Okay, but hold on. Let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
If I have multiple autonomous AIs constantly querying each other, right?
Oh, I.
Just passing variables back and forth without any human intervention,
Yeah.
isn't that just a recipe for an escalating hallucination loop? I mean, if the data validator agent makes up a metric and the approval agent just trusts it and acts on it, aren't we just automating logical errors at light speed?
That is the big fear, right?
Yeah, how do you prevent a feedback loop of synthetic mistakes?
Well, that exact scenario is honestly the primary technical barrier to scaling these autonomous systems, but the architectural solution to that problem is the implementation of MCP, or Model Context Protocol servers.
Okay, yes. Let's unpack MCP.
Yeah.
Because the mechanics of MCP are fascinating.
Oh.
It completely flips how we handle AI knowledge.
It really does.
Explain how this separates the reasoning from the actual data.
Right. So historically, developers tried to bake all the necessary knowledge directly into the weights of the AI model during the training phase.
Which takes forever and costs a fortune.
Exactly. And when the model encountered a gap in that internal knowledge, what did it do? It hallucinated a plausible sounding answer.
Right.
So MCP solves this by abstracting the knowledge entirely away from the agent. The agents do not hold the enterprise data at all.
Interesting. So where is it?
Well, instead, the MCP server acts as a standardized dynamic bridge to your external data sources. So when the compliance agent needs to check a regulation, the control plane routes it to an MCP server that exclusively contains verified, real-time legal documents.
Ah, I see. So the agent is literally forced to read the actual rule book before every single decision, rather than just relying on its internal memory of what the rules used to be.
Exactly. It creates a hard separation between the reasoning engine, the LLM itself, and the factual data source, and the impact on reliability is just profound.
I'd imagine.
Yeah, IBM found that deploying these MCP architectures reduces agent hallucinations by 71%.
71%? That's massive.
And furthermore, because engineering teams aren't forced to constantly retrain or fine-tune models every single time an internal policy changes.
Oh, right, because you just update the database.
Exactly. You just update the database that the MCP server points to, and the agents instantly have the new parameters. It cuts deployment time by 45%.
That makes total sense. But, okay, when you separate the data from the reasoning engine, you definitely solve the hallucination issue.
Right.
But that immediately introduces a new vulnerability, I think, especially for our European listeners navigating the 2026 landscape.
Oh, compliance.
Yes, compliance. If an autonomous agent retrieves the right policy via MCP, but then it makes a flawed logical leap that violates European law, who owns that failure?
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that the liability chain under the EU AI Act 2026 is incredibly complex. I mean, the regulation mandates absolute transparency, explainability, and accountability for any high-risk AI system.
Right.
So if we look at a multi-agent workflow where Agent A approves a transaction, and then Agent B validates the tax code, and Agent C executes the final payment, pinpointing the exact origin of a non-compliant decision in a traditional black box system, it's nearly impossible.
Right, because it's a distributed failure.
Exactly.
And the AetherLink sources detail how their AetherDV platform approaches this. They basically hard code compliance directly into the multi-agent architecture right from inception.
Yeah, it's not an afterthought.
No, they implement what they call strict decision logging. So mechanically, what this means is every single choice an agent makes, along with the specific context it retrieved from the MCP server at that exact millisecond, is cryptographically timestamped.
Which is brilliant.
It is. An auditor doesn't just see the final action. They see the exact state of the entire system that led to it.
And they also utilize something called role-based governance.
Right. Explain that one.
So the control plane is programmed with specific threshold triggers. If an agent calculates a decision as high risk, maybe it involves a transaction over a certain monetary value, or it touches sensitive personal data, the system just halts autonomous execution.
Oh, so it stops.
It stops, and it automatically routes the context to a human in the loop for validation.
That's a great safeguard.
Right. And when you combine that with EU native data residency to ensure GDPR compliance, plus explainability modules that force the agent to generate a plain text reasoning chain for its actions, the whole architecture is just fundamentally auditable.
Okay, but Again, let me be the skeptic here representing our listeners' fears.
Go for it.
You're outlining an architecture where we hard-code governance triggers, we log literally every subtask, and we force agents to generate plain text reasoning for every single API call.
Yeah.
That introduces immense latency. Let's be real, in enterprise tech, agility is the priority.
Yeah.
Stacking this much red tape into the foundational layer, it has to severely bog down deployment speeds, right?
Well, your intuition says yes, but the empirical data actually reveals a fascinating compliance performance paradox.
A paradox? How so?
We have to analyze why AetherLink's 2025 consulting data shows that enterprises utilizing these compliance-first architectures actually deploy 2.3 times faster at scale.
Wait, faster? How is that possible?
It comes down to friction in the later stages of the development lifecycle.
Oh, you mean faster deployment because they aren't getting stalled in regulatory review later on?
Exactly. It's about avoiding the rollback trap. Because when engineering teams prioritize raw speed over governance with autonomous AI in Europe, they almost inevitably violate regulatory thresholds once they hit production.
Right.
And then what happens? Regulators flag the system, and the company is literally forced to halt operations, pull the entire multi-agent network offline, and attempt post-hoc remediation.
Which is a nightmare.
It takes months. Trying to reverse engineer a black box multi-agent system to find out why it broke a law incurs severe financial penalties and lost time. But by designing the agent control plan to meticulously log and audit itself from day one, sure, you absorb a slight latency hit up front,
Right.
but you completely eliminate the friction of retroactive compliance engineering.
We deploy once, and you scale without the looming threat of a forced shutdown.
Exactly.
That makes total sense. Okay, so we've covered the theoretical architecture, we've covered the compliance mechanics, but the true test of this framework is how it actually performs in production.
Right, the real world.
So let's look at the operational realities, specifically how an enterprise prevents the compute costs of running thousands of agentic loops from just completely destroying their IT budget.
Yeah, the API bills can be scary, but the enterprise finance automation deployment that was detailed in the AetherLink article, it provides the perfect real-world sandbox to analyze these mechanics.
Oh, right, the financial services firm.
Yeah, a European client processing 100,000 invoices a month.
And the complexity really lies in their structure there.
Yeah.
Because they're spread across 15 distinct operating entities, right?
Yeah.
And each one is subject to different regional tax codes and regulatory frameworks.
Exactly. It's a logistical nightmare. Their legacy manual routing process required a 90-day cycle just to clear a single invoice.
In 80 days?
And they suffered a 12% error rate. But critically, they had an 8% compliance violation rate.
Which is huge under the new laws. So AetherLink replaced that legacy system by deploying a multi-agent orchestration framework utilizing the exact principles we've been discussing.
Yes.
And they established 5 specialized agents. Let's list them. A classification agent tasked with parsing incoming PDFs. A compliance agent that cross-references GDPR and regional tax rules via an MCMS server.
Right.
A validation agent that checks the data against internal budgets. An approval agent that handles human-in-the-loop routing for those edge cases we talked about. And finally, an integration agent that pushes the finalized approved data to the company's ledger.
And the performance metrics after 12 months of deployment are just staggering. They compress that 90-day cycle time down to just 3.2 days.
That's unbelievable.
80% of all invoices are now processed with zero human intervention. The error rate fell from 12% to 0.3%.
Wow.
But the metric that justifies the entire architectural shift, right, the compliance violation rate dropped from 8% to absolute zero.
Zero violations.
Zero. The control plane logged 1.2 million individual agent decisions, maintaining a perfect cryptographic audit trail. The compliance agent successfully flagged 847 regulatory edge cases, routing them to humans with zero false positives and zero missed violations.
I mean, the financial impact of that precision alone is an estimated 2.4 million euros saved solely in avoided regulatory penalties.
Exactly.
But the most vital operational metric for the CTOs listening is the compute cost. They managed to reduce their monthly AI operational cost to $15,000.
Right, which seems impossibly low.
The math on that requires some explanation. I mean, running 1.2 million automated decisions through large language models should generate an astronomical API bill.
It really should.
If every agent is constantly reasoning, retrieving, logging, how is the control plane keeping the compute cost down to 15 grand?
Well, the mechanism driving that cost reduction is dynamic model routing.
Okay, dynamic model routing. What is that?
Basically, a multi-agent system does not need to rely on the smartest, most computationally expensive frontier model for every single subtask.
Right.
The control plane utilizes a lightweight semantic router. So when a task enters the queue, the router analyzes its structural complexity. For a simple task like the classification agent, just determining if a scanned document is an invoice or a marketing flyer, the router directs the prompt to a very small, highly optimized open weights model.
Oh, which costs almost nothing.
Exactly. It costs a fraction of a cent per API call.
So it functions kind of like a triage system. It's like you don't need a senior partner at a top-tier law firm to sit in the mailroom and sort the daily post, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect analogy.
You use an intern for the baseline sorting.
Yeah.
And you only wake up the senior partner, the expensive frontier model, when you encounter a really complex legal defense that actually requires deep logical reasoning.
Right. The control plane acts as the financial gatekeeper. It allocates compute resources strictly based on the cognitive demand of the prompt.
That's brilliant.
And one financial client utilizing this specific dynamic routing strategy reduced their AI compute costs by 73% while still maintaining 99.2% accuracy across 2 million monthly API calls.
Incredible.
And they pair this with latency tiering, too.
That's that.
Well, while time-critical customer queries are processed instantly using faster models, 85% of the invoice processing workload is actually batched.
Oh, so they just do it later.
Right. The control plane runs those tasks asynchronously overnight when server demand is lower, which generates an additional 40% cost saving.
Amazing. Now, there is another layer to this cost optimization mentioned in the AetherLink blueprint,
Right.
and I think it fundamentally changes how developers need to think about data retrieval. We need to dissect how RAG retrieval augmented generation is being evaluated in these agentic systems today.
Yeah, because the metrics the industry used to evaluate RAG systems even a year ago are effectively obsolete in 2026.
Totally.
Developers historically relied on benchmarks like BLEU or Rouge, and those metrics evaluated string similarity. They basically checked if the AI could generate a summary that textually resembled the source document.
Which is entirely irrelevant for an autonomous agent. I mean, we don't need the compliance agent to write a beautifully prose-heavy summary of the EU tax code.
No, nobody wants to read that anyway.
Exactly. We just needed to execute a binary decision on whether an invoice is legal or illegal.
Right. So production-ready RG evaluation has completely pivoted to focus on decision quality and context window optimization. Because every single token, every word or fragment of a word that you feed into an LLM's context window, it costs money and it consumes compute.
Yep.
So if an agent needs to verify a specific pricing clause in a supplier contract, a poorly optimized ARG system just retrieves the entire 50-page PDF and dumps it into the prompt.
Which is so inefficient. It's the equivalent of giving a student an open book test.
Right.
But instead of giving them the one specific page that contains the formula they need, you just drop the entire university library on their desk and tell them to figure it out.
Right.
It's extremely expensive. And honestly, it degrades the model's attention span.
It really does. And the AetherLink article details a manufacturing client who recognized this exact inefficiency, and they aggressively tuned their RG retrieval pipelines.
What do they do?
Instead of retrieving massive text blocks, they optimized their embedding models to extract only highly dense, surgically precise snippets of context.
Wow.
And by doing this, they reduced the average context window per decision from about 8,600 tokens down to just 2,100 tokens.
That's a massive reduction.
Yeah. That single focused optimization slashed their overall AI API costs by 61%.
61%. Retrieve only the exact context required, route the task to the most cost-efficient capable model, and cryptographically log every step to satisfy the regulators.
That's it.
I mean, that is the definitive blueprint for scaling an enterprise-grade autonomous system today. So, synthesizing all of these architectural shifts, what is the core takeaway for the technology leaders listening who are, mapping out their strategy for the next 2 years?
I think the fundamental shift is how we categorize AI within the enterprise stack itself. Multi-agent orchestration forces us to stop viewing AI as just a supplementary tool layer.
Right.
It's no longer a static utility like a search engine or a data dashboard that requires a human to initiate it. These autonomous frameworks establish AI as the core operational layer.
The operational layer.
Yeah. These systems are true partners in the workflow. They execute decisions, they enforce complex compliance mandates dynamically, and they optimize their own operational costs at a speed and scale that manual human oversight simply cannot replicate.
And the implications for implementation timelines are pretty severe, aren't they?
Very.
I mean, the AI lead architecture roadmap requires immediate action. The blueprint suggests launching high-impact, single-agent pilots with hard-coded compliance logging right now in the first half of 2026.
Yes, don't wait.
Because by Q3, those pilots really must be integrated under a centralized control plane to manage that multi-agent orchestration.
Yeah.
If a business waits until 2027 to begin establishing these compliant dynamic architectures,
It'll be too late. The regulatory fines and the compounding operational inefficiencies will just make catching up mathematically impossible.
Exactly. And, as those roadmaps accelerate, there's a broader operational reality I think we have to confront.
Oh, what's that? Well, we are actively engineering enterprise networks where autonomous agents query decentralized MCP servers for knowledge. They independently negotiate API compute budgets through dynamic routing, and they continuously audit each other's actions to ensure strict legal compliance under EU law.
It's a whole synthetic ecosystem.
Right. So my thought to leave you with is this. At what point does the day-to-day operational layer of a multinational company become more synthetic than human? And as that transition solidifies, how does that fundamentally redefine the very nature of what it means to be a corporate leader managing a workforce of algorithms?
For more AI insights, visit etherlink.ai.